All right. Oh, this is bright. I wonder if there's lights.
I got it. Yeah.
Ah, there we go. How's that? Better? Okay, so this thing is set up so that you do not need to be following along on your computer. So if you are someone who is going to need power for your computer for the next thing, and you need to conserve that power, I would strongly suggest taking notes on a piece of paper for now, so that you can then install the template, right? Because you all have Hardy second, and you are definitely going to need your laptop for that, okay? So if you are going to run out in an hour and a half, you should conserve now and write on pen and paper. I will then send out the link to the notes here so you can review them there. But anything that you take notes on can be done with pen and paper, okay? All right, so this lecture is about how to research. And obviously there are a lot of components that go into research. This lecture in particular is going to be about finding a good argument, finding a good card to support your argument, and finally, a brief tutorial on how to cut the card that you find. So there are sort of 3 steps to the research process. You have to be able to find something that is an argument. You have to be able to find a card that then makes that argument. And then you need to cut the card that you find. So, first component. Finding a good argument. The first thing you need to do in order to make a good argument in debate is to get background knowledge on the topic. Oh, cheese and crackers. All right, come on in. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Okay, the first thing you need to do in order to get good knowledge, find a good argument, is to get background knowledge on the topic, which means finding out what exactly the literature says about a particular issue. It's not good to start with your argument and then try and find cards to find it. That is not a very successful strategy, and more importantly, it will often lead you to miss things. So instead, we want you to start with an area like the Cuban embargo and start broad. Read generally about the embargo so that you then know what arguments are in that area, as opposed to trying to start from a very specific argument. It doesn't work very well. The second suggestion I have here is to let your arguments evolve. By that, I mean as you do research, you will accumulate more knowledge in a field. You do not want to stick to the very first argument you found or stick with the first thing that you were able to encounter, because that means you're ignoring all of the things you've learned since then. So instead, you need to start broadly and then start to narrow. But as you discover new arguments, let those arguments evolve. Maybe you think you're going to start with a human rights advantage and you end up with a human rights credibility advantage. It's in the same area, but it's definitely a different argument. And the way that that works is because you are letting your arguments evolve. You are determining what is in the literature and then assessing from there. The other thing you want to do as you start reading generally is to look for common responses to your argument. So lots of times when you're reading articles, you will discover that the author will respond to his or her opponent. So he or she might say, some people say that blah, 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 but I think blah, blah, blah. And the best way, you should not only pay attention to that, but you should keep a list of arguments against your argument, because it gives you the ability to then know what you need to write blocks to. Eventually, you're turning this into a debate argument, which you're going to have to write answers to what your opponents say. And the only way you can do that is if you know what the common responses are to your argument, and you proceed from there. Okay, so that's sort of the general idea of finding a good argument. You want to start broadly, do a bunch of reading before you ever try and cut a card, know a lot about the issue. That's part of why we have topic lectures here, right? So you have had lectures on the countries so that you know more about those countries. So when you go start to research, you don't start from who is the president of Venezuela. You know Nicolas Maduro is the president of Venezuela, and then you can start reading about Maduro. So the more you know in the beginning, the better off you will be. Okay. Finding a good card. So, who knows how Google works? What does Google do when you do a search? What does Google do? Yeah, in the back.
It takes the words that you put into the search, that you type into the search bar, and looks for those specific words.
Yes, so it looks for those words. It trolls the internet, scans the internet, looking for the words that you put in the search bar. Okay? So, this is critically important because it is the biggest difference between good debate searches and bad debate searches. Bad debate searches look for what you would call an argument, not what words would be in the article about that argument. So for example, there are, if you ever, who's ever seen Google autofill, where you like start typing something and it'll autofill for you? Yeah. So you can see thousands of debaters doing terrible research when you play with Google autofill. So if you type in like hegemony, the first thing that will come up is like hegemony bad. Now, hegemony bad is not an argument that occurs in the literature, right? Nobody writes about it. It's like, I'm writing this article today. It's called hedge bad, okay? Same thing with like prolif. If you type in proliferation, if you get to prolif, it'll be like prolif bad. Prolif doesn't work. It's like, these are not things that appear in articles. Instead, what you want to do is think about what would someone who is writing the article that you're talking about use, what words would they use in their article, okay? What words would they use in their article? So, political capital high, not a good search. Why? What?
That's what we use.
That's what we use, yeah. Are they likely to use the word high in their article? Probably not. They might say, you know, Obama is engaging in political capital, Obama is using his political capital, Obama has restored his political capital, but they are very unlikely to say political capital high. But if you go to Google right now and you type in political capital, one of the immediate options is like political capital high. And the reason for that is because debaters do a lot of searches, but they do a lot of bad searches. So don't think about the tag of the argument or the block heading of the argument. That's not how authors write articles. Instead, you want to think about what words are they going to use in those articles. This will also make you much, much better at doing research, not only for debate, but also for all of your other classes. So one of the nice benefits of learning how to be a good researcher is that it helps you in every class you ever take. So Ms. Vovoda here is a history teacher, and I'm sure she knows that a lot of the things that students have to search for and when they're doing a good history paper is to do research. And so her students who know how to do good Google searches are going to be much better in her history class, not just in debate. So Google, that's just sort of a short summary of how Google works. All right, so the next section, which is pretty long, is how to use Google or advanced Google. So the first one we're going to look at is quotation marks. Okay, how to use quotation marks. Who's ever done a quotation mark search? This is like a pretty common like step 2 Google search. Good. Okay, so what quotation marks do is they allow you to do a search for a phrase. So this search, Obama with political capital and quotation marks, will only find websites that use the term political capital, not ones that use capital in one sentence and then political 20 sentences later, okay? So this is incredibly useful for doing searches for people's names. So if you're looking for a particular person and you need to search for a particular person's name, put that name in quotation marks, because otherwise they're just, you know, if you're searching for Susan Smith, it's just going to find any website that has the word Susan and any website that has the word, also has the word Smith. But when you put it in quotation marks, it will only find Susan Smith. So this search for Obama political capital in quotation marks only finds searches that have the term political capital together, right? You'll see in these examples, it has political capital. It's not just talking about politics in general and capital in general. It's talking about political capital. So this search, you know, some of the searches, some of the results obviously get you ones that demonstrate political capital exists. There's one down here, no such thing as political capital. But either way, you know, the whole search is going to find you things about political capital, not just things about politics in general. Okay, the second one is a time-limited search. Who's ever done a time-limited search? All right, a couple people, that's good. Time-limited searches allow you to basically make Google into Google News. What's the major difference between, well, there's 2 major differences between Google News and Google. What are they? Or what's one? Yeah?
Doesn't Google News organize it by time?
For sure. That's the one we're talking about here. Google News organizes things by time. It doesn't just list anything. When you search Google, you might find the Wikipedia page that was edited 2 years ago, and you might find a news article from 1997, and you might find the main page that hasn't been updated in a couple of years, and then you might find a news article. So that's one difference. What's the other difference between Google and Google News?
It'll all be credible if it comes up on Google News.
Okay. All be credible is a start. I would describe it a little bit more narrowly as they're all news sources. Okay? So they're all news sources. But sometimes there are credible things like journal articles that don't come up on Google News. But you're right. So Google News tends to, it's not going to be maggie.blogspot.com. That doesn't come up on Google News. That doesn't get indexed. But one of the disadvantages of using Google, so Google, broader search tool, but it's not organized by time. But you can make Google organized by time for you. So this is a search for Nicolas Maduro, but it only really has a couple of news articles at the top, and then it tells me the Wikipedia and his biography at people.com, and something from the Huffington Post. If I want to know news about Maduro, but I don't want to limit myself just to newspapers, if I want like also more journal articles, also some blogs, that kind of thing, I can time limit my search. So what you do, you do your regular search, and then you click where it says search tools. So going back, right there, it says right below the Nicolas Maduro bar, right next to the blue thing, it says search tools. Click on search tools, and it brings up a box that looks like this and you can change any time to a specific time. So in this case, if you only want information about Maduro from the last week, you're like, I need to know what's going on now. You click on search tools, and then you change this to any time, or past week, or past month, or past year. And that will allow you to basically turn Google into a broader Google News search. So it will still find the things that you'll find on Google News, but it will also find additional things that aren't indexed by Google News. So that can be useful, especially if the thing you're searching for on Google News is not, if there aren't as many articles about it, Google will find more. Okay, so then, once I time limited the search, I get this version instead. It's all brand new news about Maduro. So instead of the larger, or the search that got me the Wikipedia page and his biography, I just want to know news. This is the way to get news out of Google. Okay, the next one, a minus search. Who's ever done a minus search? A couple people. All right, we're getting some. This is good. What, if you were reading about Venezuela in the last 2 weeks, what name would come up in almost every search? Snowden. Okay, so the last set of news about Venezuela is almost all about Snowden. Okay, but maybe you're trying to do an affirmative or negative research that isn't about Snowden, right? And so you do your search and you're just like, Snowden, 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 Snowden. This is terrible. How do I get rid of all of these articles that are about Snowden and not about, Venezuela's economy or Venezuela's infrastructure or whatever? This is how you use a minus search. So this one, if I want to read about Maduro, but I don't want to read about Snowden, the search I should do is Maduro minus Snowden. And you'll notice there's a minus sign, and it's right in front of the word. There's no space. Do you all see that? So it's like minus with no spaces in between. If you put in a space, it doesn't work. So it has to be minus and then the word right there together. And you can also combine this with quotation marks. So you could do like minus, Nicolas Maduro, or minus whatever you wanted to get rid of in quotation marks. But the minus search is very useful. This is also incredibly useful if you ever have to do a research project where there's 2 different versions of a word. So like if you're researching, ancient brewing facilities and you keep getting articles about the Milwaukee Brewers, or you're researching, trying to get articles about like an actual Oriole, the bird, and you keep getting, baseball articles, the minus sign is your friend. So like minus quotation marks Milwaukee Brewers will get you only articles about brewing. Or if you're trying to get rid of the Orioles, minus Baltimore Orioles will really make your life better. So yeah.
When you do a minus search for something like that, when it's like 2 words, do you have to, how does that work?
So there's 2 ways to do it. If it's the same word, you would do it in quotation marks. So like if you wanted to get, if you were doing a research on the Vikings and for a history paper, but you didn't want to read all about the Minnesota Vikings, you would do Vikings and then minus with no space, quotation mark, Minnesota Vikings, end quotation mark. And that will get rid of the phrase Minnesota Vikings from all of those searches. This is incredibly powerful, especially for these searches, like I said, where there's multiple terms. But for debate, it's incredibly powerful if you're trying to get rid of a particular issue. So if you're doing politics research, for example, and you're looking for other things on the agenda, but you only get articles about immigration reform, you could do minus comprehensive immigration reform or minus immigration reform to try and get those articles out of there. Obviously, sometimes it's too broad of a tool and you end up missing some things, but it generally works very, very well. So this then gets rid of Snowden, and none of these articles are about Snowden. Okay, the next one is define colon. Define colon. This is very useful for when you're reading along and you come across terms you don't know. If you type into Google define colon and then a word, it will define it for you. So if I was reading along and I was like, I don't know what hegemony is, I need some help, define colon hegemony. Gets me definitions of hegemony. Google will define it for me, and then will get me other articles about how to define hegemony. around. This is what I only learned recently and is incredibly useful. Basically, when Google does a search and you just put in 2 words or 3 words, it just finds those anywhere in the page, right? But sometimes it's like it's like Obama's at the beginning and political capital is the last 4 sentences of the word, and it's not about Obama at all, and then you become very frustrated. So what around allows you to do is to determine how far apart you want those words to be in the article. So if you search Obama around parentheses 5 Venezuela, it will find articles that has the word Obama within 5 words of the word Venezuela. Does this make sense how useful this is? So when you're looking for things, it can be very, if obviously you want to start broadly, but as you begin to narrow, you may be looking for a particular piece of evidence, and it's very difficult if you can't specify. So Obama around 5, around has to be in all caps, and there's no space before the number, and the number can be anything. You can do around 20, around 100, but it basically gets those terms near each other in searches.
Is there space between Obama and around?
Yeah, so like first word space, around in all caps, parentheses 5, or number, close parentheses space, other word. Next one is Filetype. Who's ever done a Filetype search? Okay, nobody. I'll go 2 people. Okay, that was pretty good. A Filetype search allows you to search for a particular type of file. And the one I suggest you try using in debate is Filetype (PDF). And you can add this to the beginning or end of any of your searches, and it will bring up only PDFs. Why PDFs? Well, because generally, when journals are posting things online or very reputable news sources, a lot of times they post reports as PDFs. So if you're looking for government reports, journal articles, that sort of thing, Filetype PDF really helps you improve the quality of your search. So for example, when I search Latin America, in quotation marks because I want it together, economy, Filetype PDF, the searches I get are all really high quality sources. I'm getting things like in the World Economic Forum. I'm getting from the Latin America Economic Outlook. You're getting a lot of really good sources. So if you're looking for something and you're saying to yourself, I'm just not getting quality sources. I'm getting articles, but not very good ones. Try adding Filetype PDF to the end, and you'll start getting government reports and other journal articles. Okay, and does anyone know why we don't use and with Google? This one's kind of a misnomer. If I could strike through it, I would. Yeah?
Because then it searches the web for articles that end in them as well.
Yeah, so Google automatically, when you type 2 things, it automatically searches for both of those, okay? So if you type Obama Maduro, it's not searching for, articles that have Obama in them but not Maduro. It only searches for things that include both of those things. So you do not need to ever type and into Google. It just looks for the word and, okay? But, or is a very useful Google search. So if you type or in all caps, and I'll show you this in a second, it will search for the first thing or the second thing. So this is very useful for topicality searches where you might have a whole string of phrases that you are willing to find in the evidence. So this one, economic engagement or diplomatic engagement, both as phrases, allow you to investigate web pages that include either the phrase economic engagement or the phrase diplomatic engagement. And it gives you the opportunity to see all of those things without having to do 2 separate searches. Obviously, I could search for economic engagement, read all of those results, and then do a second search for diplomatic engagement. But this allows me to see both of those at the same time. So, or is very useful, has to be in all caps. And you can do it with either phrases or just regular words. Parentheses. So just like in math, parentheses allow you to group things in Google. And so if you want to do a search, and you want to search for example, Obama and engage either Maduro or Venezuela, put those in parentheses, and then it will search for anything that includes Obama engage Maduro, and then and also anything that includes Obama engage Venezuela. So it allows you to do more efficient searches by combining searches into one search. Cite colon. Cite colon allows you to search a particular domain. So if you want to search all of CNN for something, and there's a CNN article about it, you can do cite colon CNN.com, and it will search that source for you. This is very useful if either you're looking for something but you know it's on a particular source but you don't know exactly what's in it, so you can do a broader search but just for that site. Or if you're looking at things like if you're looking at particular research group or think tank, and you know they probably have some articles about Venezuela, you can search just their website. This is also incredibly useful for websites that have their own searches, but their own search is terrible. You can just use Google to replace it, right? So if you're searching, for example, for a New York Times article, like I did here, and you think that the New York Times own search, internal search, is kind of not as good as it could be, which it probably is, you can use site:NewYorkTimes.com and then search for that yourself in Google, and Google will do that site search for you. This is very, very useful. Okay, InText. How many of you have ever done a Google search and then you've looked for the word in the article and you couldn't find the word? You were like doing a search and then that word never showed up in the article. This happens to me doing T research all the time, where I'll search for the phrase economic engagement and then I'll be reading and it's like sort of about economic engagement, but it doesn't use that phrase. So I'm like, oh, that's not very useful. I need a T card that says economic engagement. The way to fix that is the InText. So basically what Google does is when you provide it with a set of search terms, it will also search synonyms. So if I search economic engagement, it might also let me investigate, diplomatic engagement or political engagement or other types of engagement. It doesn't necessarily know that I need the exact phrase economic engagement. Does that make sense? Or it might search for like engagement in economics. InText.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Mid-lecture excitement. Sometimes it gets boring. You all woke up now. No one's asleep. All right. InText allows you to do that. So if I search InText economic engagement, InText United States, it will only find articles that include both of those in the text of the article, not in the title, not in the link to the article, not a synonym for it. It only includes the ones that include that actual phrase in the text. So if you're ever doing topicality research, InText is a very good friend for you. All right, so all of these things can be combined. You can make combinations out of all these. I'll show you a couple examples. This one uses InText economic engagement, InText Venezuela or Mexico or Cuba. So if you wanted to find a card that was economic engagement about one of the topic countries, but you didn't care which one it was because you're looking for all of them eventually, this would be a search you could use. It has economic engagement, and then it requires it to have at least one of Venezuela, Mexico, or Cuba. And it provides you with the ability to do a bunch of searches all at once. This one, economic engagement United States Filetype PDF, is if you were trying to improve the quality of your sources. So if you were looking for articles about United States economic engagement, but you didn't just want a blog post about it, you wanted a journal or a US government report about it, Filetype PDF really helps you narrow that way down. This one's really long, and you certainly don't need to write this down. But basically, this shows you like all the things that we've talked about. This one's United States or Obama, so something about our country. Within 10 words of in either direction of Venezuela or Maduro, but not about Snowden. Okay, so this would be what is going on with the United States and Venezuela that's not about Snowden. And so there's a whole set of articles there. And if you wanted to limit it even more, right, because the first one is U.S.-Venezuela relations, you might do a time-limited search on this one. You could add that, and that would really improve the quality here. Okay, so other places to search. Google is very useful. The main Google is very useful, but there are some other ways to do these searches that can improve your results. So, other things to search. There's sort of two categories here. General access sites, which are things that you can get to anywhere, like Google or Google News, Google Books, Google Alerts, Amazon Previews, are all sources that we're going to talk about in just a second that allow you to be able to do searches anywhere, whether you're at home or at a debate tournament or at school, unless your school blocks a lot of things. Limited access sites, yeah. Limited access sites are ones that you might be able to use while you're at a college campus or while you're visiting a library, but unless your school subscribes to them, you are unlikely to have personal access to these things. So Google Scholar allows you to do searches only for scholarly sources, but it is limited. Then most of those articles you won't have access to unless you pay for them. LexisNexis is a proprietary search. It's very useful, but unless you have Lexis, like a Lexis code that your school has purchased, you won't be able to access it. EBSCO and JSTOR, some schools do have these. These are the two that the school is most likely to have access to because they sell academic discounts, and a lot of libraries have them. So if you want to explore these things, go ask your school librarian if you have access to EBSCO or JSTOR. They have a lot of journal articles there. But starting with the general access ones, Google News. So we talked about Google News a little bit at the beginning. It's very useful in terms of being able to search for up-to-date news articles. It is not as useful in terms that it limits your sources. So if you are just looking for things in newspaper articles, or especially things really up-to-date like politics articles, Google News is incredibly useful, but it is limited in terms of what you can do for it if you're looking for other broader sources. Government reports are not going to show up on Google News. So you need to do most of your searches in both places. Google Alerts. Who's ever set a Google Alert? Awesome. Okay. So a couple of you know all about this. What Google Alerts allow you to do is do a search once and then have Google email you whenever there are new articles about that search. Okay? And sometimes that might be really overwhelming. So are any of you in Mr. Mahoney's lab? Yeah, so he has a search set right now, a Google alert for Cuba, and he has one for the word Venezuela, and he has one for the word Mexico, okay? And so to his email every day, he gets every article that's published that appears on Google that has the word Cuba in it, which just sounds incredibly overwhelming, but he's able to do that for the summer and go through them very quickly. But you do want to be careful that if you're setting a really broad search term, that you are going to get a lot of articles. They'll group them for you. It doesn't just totally spam you, but you can set how frequently you want it and how many articles you want. So this one would be a search for Obama, around 20 Cuba, so Obama within 20 words of Cuba. And you can fiddle with result type. Do you want result type everything, result type news only, result type no video, I think, and there are some other ones. And then you can say how often. How often do you want Google to email you with these results? Do you want it to email you once a day? Do you want it to email you as it comes in? Strongly suggest not that second option. You'll get a million articles. But once a day, if you get once a day email, it's not too bad. And then you can say how many. You can change it between only the best results or all results. If you're just starting, I would suggest only the best results, or you'll get overwhelmed pretty quick. But it'll deliver it to your email, and then you don't have to do that search all the time. Oh, sorry. Wrong button. Okay, Google Books. Google, in addition to all of its searching on the web of resources, also has scanned thousands and thousands, perhaps millions by now, of books. And some of those books you have access to because they're in the public domain or because the authors have made part of them available. So Google Books, if you go to books.google.com, and you can search for a particular book, and if they do have that book, it will often let you search inside the book. So over here on the left-hand side of your Google Books screen is like a little search bar, a tiny little search bar, and you can search within that book for particular phrases. So if you're looking for like the name of a program, for example, and you don't know if that program is written about in this book, you can search inside the book using Google Books. It's very useful. You can't always cut the whole book. Sometimes, it only gives you a limited preview, but it's incredibly valuable for books. Amazon Previews is another way to get access to books. So especially in a field like Latin America, there are tons of books written every year that are incredibly useful to you, and it would be a shame if you only looked at the internet and not at the books. And at a minimum, you will definitely have to look at books for things like school assignments. So knowing how to get access to books without having to actually go to a bookstore and buy a book is very useful. So Amazon Previews is the other really easy way to do this. And if you search for a book on Amazon, a lot of books now, especially scholarly books, will have a section over here where it says search inside this book or a click to look inside button. And either one of those will get you, so search inside this book, will get you a page that looks like this. And if you click over here, you can search inside the book for phrases that might appear in there. So if you want to search inside the idea of Latin America for economic engagement, maybe you could see if that appears in here. You could search for all sorts of other terms like the program that your affirmative is about and that sort of thing. It will also often let you click on chapters and read sections of the book. So you can't always read the whole book, either on Google Books or on Amazon Previews. But a lot of times between the two, you can read a good bit of the book. So this is very useful. This is also useful if you're considering buying a book but you're not sure if it's good. Lots of times I'll think of a book and I'll be like, oh, this title sounds amazing. And then I get the book and it's like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was at all. use one of these before you ever buy a book for debate. It makes your life a lot easier, before you ever go to the library to pick out a book. Okay, so next section is pro tips for the research process. Pro tips for the research process. The first one is to change your search results so that Google will show you 100 results by default. So ordinarily when you do a Google search, it shows you the top 10 results. That's puny, that's nothing. 10 results, it's really hard. And then you have to keep clicking through and it reloads every time and it's a total pain. So instead, change your search results to 100. The way to do that is you do a search and then you're going to click, you're going to click up here on that little gear, which is like your settings button. And it'll take you to something called, the gear looks like this, and you click on search settings. So gear to search settings, and you get something that looks like this. What you want to do is change results per page to 100. Okay? So instead of showing me the top 10 things, it's going to show me the top 100 things. There is no tip that I can give you that will lead to you more productivity than this one. And I don't know why it is, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I still, it's like when I reach the bottom of the page, I'm like, that search wasn't very good. I'm going to do a different search, okay? But when you do that and you've only looked at 10 things, you have not actually evaluated your search. You don't know anything about that search. Maybe that search was amazing, but it was thing number 12 or thing number 37 that had the article that you absolutely need. So instead, change your results to per page to 100. And then you will see you can very quickly skim through a whole page of results. It makes your life a lot easier and will make you find much better cards. Another thing you can do is use command click. This is the Mac version, so I'm saying command, but if you're watching this in your PC version, use control click. But if you have a whole set, of results and you want to just like open articles to read later, just command click on the title of the article and it will open it in a new tab behind the one you're currently using. So what I like to do is get a big search and I'm scanning down the articles, but I want to read. If you switch back and forth between reading and looking for articles and reading and looking for articles, it's much slower. So instead, I like to command or control click, open all the articles that look good, and then start reading through them.
If
Makes
you
it
use
more
a
efficient.
mouse, you could also just hit the middle button or the scroll wheel, and it'll do the same thing.
Thank you. Bonus fun tip. That segues very nicely into the next tip, which is to get good with tech efficiency. I strongly suggest all of you do get a mouse. It makes not only your scrolling much easier, but allows you to do things like the center wheel click. It allows you to do things like set up your template so that the template buttons will work with your mouse, which is another fun fact that you'll get after I think you learn how to use the template. And it just makes you much more efficient. At any time you are able to save in the technology stage of the process is time that you get for the research stage of the process. Last one in here is skim a lot and use Control F or Command F for you all in order to find things, phrases in the article. So if you get up a document that's 60 or 70 pages, don't read the whole thing right away. Read the introduction, see if it looks promising, and then start skimming, looking at our section headings, right? You don't want to just like delve into a 60-page article and come out 2 days later and discover that there were no cards. Do yourself a favor and skim, use Control F to try and find things within that article that makes your life a lot easier. Okay, so now you found some articles. How do you cut the card? You found the article, you're like, I have this amazing article, I'm really excited about it, I used all these awesome search terms, I practiced using InText, I used Filetype, I used quotation marks, maybe I searched a particular site, I'm excited. I have this card. What do I do now? The first thing you need to know is what is a card. A card is one or more paragraphs, and if it's more than one paragraph, it has to be all together. You can't take paragraph 1 and paragraph 7 and put them together. So one or more continuous paragraphs that makes a single argument. One or more continuous paragraphs that makes a single argument. And we call them cards because way back in the day, people would handwrite them onto note cards. But a card is just a single argument that occurs together in an article. And then you're going to need to include a citation and a tag in order to make it usable in debate. So anytime you've ever read evidence in a debate before, it has included a citation and included a tag, which is just like the label for that argument, so that you could read it in the debate. If you're cutting your own cards, you need to do that as well. So, how to cut a card. So let's say I have this article. It's pretty good. It says the U.S. should drop the Cuba embargo for oil exploration. I'm pretty excited about it. I need to figure out which part I'm going to read. So I read through and I decide that this section, from up there to down here, is a card. Now remember, it's got to be continuous paragraphs. So I can't take that paragraph up there and this paragraph up here and cut out the two in the middle. Okay, that's cheating. You will lose. That's like a violation of all the debate rules. Instead, I need to, if I want to read all parts from all of this, I need to cut the whole thing from up there down to here. Okay? If I only liked this paragraph, I could cut just this paragraph, but I can't cut this, right? Because it has to be at least one complete paragraph. Always cut in paragraphs, always cut continuously. Never start or end a card in the middle of a paragraph. Okay, so I copy all of that, and I copied it into my Word document. I was pretty excited. Copied it into my Word document. And then I need to give it a tag and I need to give it a cite. So when you're adding citations and tagging your evidence, it's really important to be very precise. Your lab leaders will show you, so don't panic and think you need to write this down. But your lab leaders will show you how they want you to do citations. The important part here is to make sure you're including as much information as is humanly possible. So here I have Hellman 11, that's the last name and the date. And I have that this is Christopher Hellman, that's his full name. Who is he? He's a Forbes staff writer. Oh, not though is he just a staff writer. He's from the Southwest Bureau covering Houston, the U.S. energy capital. I like that. It's from Forbes Online. The title of the article is U.S. should drop Cuba embargo for oil exploration. It came out on December 12th, 2011, and there's the URL, okay? So that's all the information someone might possibly need in order to find this article. And not only does it allow them to find this article, it allows you in the debate to be able to talk about whether your author is qualified or not. So very complete citations err on the side of more information. And then after that, we gave it a tag. Embargo fails and stops. Proactive approach to spills. This is Mr. Repco's tag. It's pretty good. It's in the oil 1AC from the starter packet. But basically, we have now cut a card. There is a tag, there is a citation, and there is an underlined section that we copy-pasted from an article. Okay, last section, and then I'll take questions, is common research mistakes. Common research mistakes. The first common research mistake I think is probably the most common. It's wishful thinking. You think there's an argument out there, but you've never seen an article about it. You're just sure someone must say it. And that's one version of wishful thinking, where you just keep pursuing an argument even if it doesn't seem like anyone actually writes it. Another version of wishful thinking is where you can't really find a card that says the thing you want, so you're like, this card's like kind of close. And you tag it to then say what you want. That goes poorly for you. You will lose in cross-ex because the other team will point out, rightfully so, that your card does not say what you think it says, and then you will lose. So don't be very realistic about your searches. If you can't find the card, you need to change the argument, right? We need to make our searches adaptive. So don't just wish your way through an argument that you can't find. The second thing is one we've already talked about, doing debate searches. Prolif bad, not a good search. Okay, not a good search. Think about articles or phrases that would occur in an article about that thing, not the argument you want to make in debate. Third common mistake is unqualified or incomplete qualifications. Lots of cards cut at camp are not qualified. You'll notice is that the basic bare minimum for qualifications is that they are a journalist writing for a reputable news source. Even better is a professor in the field, or someone who lives there, or a researcher for the Congressional Research Service, or any of those things are all much more qualified. But the idea is you want someone who is an expert on the thing you're talking about. That's why we read evidence, right? If it was just something, if the person is only as qualified as you are or as I am, we could just talk about the argument. The reason we read evidence is to provide a more qualified perspective on a subject. And so you want to make sure your searches are very, very qualified. A fourth common mistake is overly lengthy evidence. If you have a card and you're only underlining just bare smidgens here or there, a sentence from here, a sentence from here, a sentence from here, it might not be a card. There's tons of ununderlined parts for the other team to use against you, and it's just probably not very good if the author isn't really talking about what you're talking about. So it's easy to find a long card. It's hard to find a short card. We challenge you to try and find shorter cards that make those arguments. Remember, it has to be at least a paragraph, but paragraph or more. FYI cards are another common problem. A card that doesn't really make an argument, it just tells you something about the issue. So we have an embargo with Cuba. It's not something that we really need a card on. It's going to be referenced in all of our other evidence. You need to, if you're researching the Cuban embargo, to be looking for cards that say we should lift the embargo, or this is why the embargo is bad, or something about that. Not just things that inform us that we have a program. Another pertinent problem is a straw person card, or a card where you don't understand the author's argument. What's a straw person card? Does anyone know? Oh, devastating. Okay. Well, just so this is like, imagine from the Wizard of Oz, the straw man. Okay. The reason these are called straw person cards is because a straw man is easy to knock down. Okay. And so sometimes what authors will do in their articles is they will set up straw people, where they'll say, some people say that blah 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 blah, but I think this. You can't cut the some people say part because it's not what the author is saying. You can't say, Maggie Berthiaume thinks you should do terrible research if what I really said is, some people think you should do terrible research, but I think you should do really good research, okay? Don't underline the first part of that. That's not what the person is saying. So you have to go with what the author's intent is. Read the introduction and the conclusion in order to figure out what the author really thinks about something, and then you can use that in order to find cards in the article. The next mistake that people often make is to skip cards you don't need right now. So if you're researching the Cuban embargo and you find an awesome Mexico politics link, you should cut that card. It is much, much, much easier to cut that card right then than it is to find it again later. Another common mistake is you have been assigned by your lab leader to cut an affirmative. So you're cutting like the Mexican guest worker affirmative, and you find Mexican guest worker negative cards, and you're like, oh, I was only assigned the F, not cutting those. Okay, that's a big problem, because I guarantee you what's going to happen right after your lab leader assigns you to cut the affirmative is they're going to say, okay, now go back and cut the negative. And you're like, oh, all of those cards I skipped would have been really useful. So at a minimum, you don't need to make it the best tag, or you don't need to necessarily underline it, but at least save them somewhere so you don't lose them. Yeah?
It'd be smart to just click on it and email it yourself.
That's one way to do it. So yeah, if you find like a whole neg article and you're like, I don't have time to read this neg article right now, yeah, email it to yourself with like Cuba neg article or whatever. But if it's just a card along a set of things that you're reading, or a counterplan idea, just cut it right then. It's probably faster to cut it. But yes, if it's a big long article, or like you find a website that has 1 million articles about it, that's very, very useful. Do that spot. Okay, the last one is don't give up. Don't give up too soon. Part of the reason we're telling you to change your search terms to 100, change it so you get 100 at a time, is to encourage you not to give up. But this is my attempt to encourage you verbally not to give up. Research is hard. It's one of the most valuable things you can learn in debate, because it not only helps you be an amazing debater, it helps you be an amazing student, an amazing professional. I have many friends who did debate in high school and never debated after that, who still use their research skills every day in their jobs as lawyers or their jobs as consultants or whatever. But all of that requires not giving up. And so if you're really not finding anything, talk to your lab leader. But don't talk to your lab leader after you've looked, for 3 things and haven't found anything yet. Keep looking, give it some time, and it will definitely be worth it. Okay, questions? Any research questions? Yeah, please.
One more thing I'd like to add to common research mistakes. I find that my students do this all the time. When you put in a group of terms that you want to appear in your article, and then you find the article, sometimes some sources will highlight those words in the article. And some students just go to that paragraph where those words are highlighted, and that's the only thing they take out of the article.
Yeah.
That may be the only place where all those words exist together, but read the whole article to figure out they may be talking about that exact same thing, they just aren't using those exact words, and maybe there are better cards in the other parts of the article. So don't just go to that can be your starting point,
Yeah.
but expand from there and don't just use that one paragraph.
Strongly agree. I will add that to the common research mistakes, because I do see that all the time, where you're missing tons of good cards because you only did Control F. So use Control F as a starting point, not an ending point, for sure. Yeah?
I have a problem with making my tags really long. Is there any way, like, whenever you're actually cutting them, how to make them more efficient?
Yeah, that's probably its own whole lecture, but the short version is you want to make a statement and then the warrants for that statement. And the rule I sort of keep in my mind is anytime I need to think about where to put a comma, my tag is probably way too long. So it's like whenever there's going to be a clause in the tag, it's too long. It should really be a simple statement as much as is humanly possible. So a single sentence with a warrant at the end of it is a very useful tag. The other thing that I would suggest you do is write out the longer version and then highlight it. Like the same way you highlight cards, right? So debaters tend to be very good at highlighting other people's arguments to make them really short when they highlight cards, but they don't do it to their own arguments. If you just highlight your tag and then obviously delete the words you don't end up highlighting, but that's one way to sort of trick yourself into writing more efficient tags. Yeah?
When you say for the for information cards for the common research mistakes, simply saying that they just state something, isn't that like most uniqueness cards or negatives?
Sometimes, but those uniqueness cards generally make an argument about what's going on. So, here's an example. Comprehensive immigration reform will pass is an argument. Comprehensive immigration reform is being debated in the House right now is not an argument. You just have to think about yourself, how would I use this in a debate? And so if you can't think of any time you would need to read that card, like the way I think of it is, what would the other team have to say for me to need to read this card? And so it's like comprehensive immigration reform will pass. I'm like, okay, they're going to say it won't pass, then I need a card that says it will. But comprehensive immigration reform is being debated. You probably don't need a card to read a card on that issue. But that's a good question. Any others? Okay, awesome job. You all can just stay here, and we are going to move.